people use JORC as this sort of magic term. It's JORC compliant. JORC's just a code of telling people what you've done.
Roland, you're an industry outsider. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, more or less.
JD, we're at risk of saying a lot of things in this episode that should not be said. Well, Roland is. Roland, welcome to Money of Mine. Thank you so much for joining us. You're prolific in what is, I guess, your column on LinkedIn called JORCWTF.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. I feel like people kind of know you just because your posts have been absolutely everywhere. What was the inspiration to start writing JORCWTF, and what is it?
Well, yeah, I'm a bit of a map nerd, and so one part of the JORC code is that you have to have a map of your drilling, and it has to have coordinates on it. But I was looking at a map, and it didn't have coordinates on it, and it had some drilling, but it didn't have all the drilling. And I was like, God, that's pretty lazy, you know. I'm like, what the fuck's going on here? How can you not put in a decent map? It's 5 minutes in map info or 5 minutes in QGIS, right? So I was like, oh, come on, guys, you can put in a better map, blah, 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 hashtag JORCWTF. And a couple of my mates were just like, JORCWTF, oh, yeah, good one. I've been pretty vocal on LinkedIn for a couple of years. I guess I started calling out a few errors and a few misconceptions in the Pilbara nugget thing that happened back, watermelon seeds.
Yeah.
And some of it was, maps that were wrong. Some of it was like, the sampling theory behind nugget seeds was never going to work. You can't sample it to convince most people that you could get a JORC resource, and so therefore, what were people doing? The WITS 2.0 hype took over, and I was one of the few people who was just like, come on, guys, cool your jets. It's
this JORCWTF has kind of morphed into, geologists have a skill set, which is to be able to disentangle the announcements that are put out by exploration companies all the time. And for some reason, not many people other than geologists ever learn the skill set to be able to disentangle those announcements. And what you do is you use your geologist skill set, you disentangle them and explain to the layman maybe how things have been polished or maybe some errors have been led there, and maybe they're accidental, or maybe they're not accidental.
Yeah.
It's a transparency thing.
Yeah. So I guess we should go over like what the JORC code is for a start. Like what is the JORC in JORCWTF? Because the WTF, it's self-explanatory. But the JORC code is a professional code, and as a competent person, you have to have enough experience in the subject matter that you are talking about. If it's geology, geotechnical, metallurgy, engineering, there's a whole bunch of things, resource geology, that you can be an expert in or not, right? You'll never see me publishing a resource because I suck at stats. I'm a real geologist. I'm bad at maths, right? So you have to do your time. You have to do 5 years minimum in order to qualify, become a competent person. But then when you're a competent person, the standard under the JORC is that you would feel comfortable defending yourself against your peers. Now, one thing is, like, who is defending themselves in the industry against their peers on a day-to-day basis? No one, right? I'm the peer that now people have to defend themselves, a couple of times down the pub, other people are like, oh, I've been agonising over an announcement because I don't want you to JORCWTF me, and some of it's for real, and some of it's a bit of a joke. But that's the JORC idea of competence: is that you have enough experience to be competent, whatever that means, and that you would feel comfortable defending yourself. Now, that's very similar to a thesis or your own science project at school. And so one of the things I like to do is go into the table 1 and table 2. And that is literally like a high school science, methods, results, conclusions. The methods are in the table 1. They're hidden at the back of the announcement, right? But that's how they have generated the data that goes into the announcement. Now, in the real world, on the ASX, your competent person has to sign off on that. It has to, in theory, be at least an e-signature on a PDF, or if preferably a wet signature on an actual declaration that the company should be keeping in a folder somewhere, or on a hard drive somewhere. Now, I know for a fact that it doesn't always happen. One of my mates, and I won't say who, was just driving down the road in the bush, and he gets phoned up by a director or a company secretary, whatever it was, and they're like, "Oh, did you see today's announcement? We put you in as the competent person." Right? Now, that's a breach of the JORC code. It's a breach of the ASX. But it happens, right? Competent people are working in, especially at the junior end, in 2 or 3 person operations that where it's like, I was at another client this morning, and it's literally a hole in the wall office in West Perth with 3 desks. That's the managing director, the exploration manager, and then they're asking me some questions. And so the way it should work is that you do your work and you provide the competent person, if he's not doing this himself, with supporting documents to underlie the market information that they're communicating. So behind every drill announcement, there should be a database filled with information from drill logs, and that the part of the JORC is that it's done in a professional manner. So that people are logging the core properly, that they're marking the meters properly, they're doing the core blocks properly, they're measuring the recovery properly, and someone has signing off on that saying it has been done properly and it is fit for use in the announcement in the form and manner in which it's communicated. Now, that's the theory, is that there is actually some information behind this. There's a report behind it. Someone who is a competent person or under the direction of a competent person has done the work, and someone signs off on it, and that's the little disclaimer that you've got in your ASX announcement. And that is then put into the table 1 and table 2, and it's like airing your dirty laundry. Sometimes the methods and sometimes the work that goes into something is just bad or misguided, or there's an error in the method, or it hasn't been properly put into the table 1 and table 2. People love not applicable. That one the other day was, what's the drill recovery? Oh, in diamond holes not applicable. I'm like, mate, you do get core loss, right? The drillers put blocks in the wrong way around. People drop trays of core and just stuff it back in, and they don't tell you. Now, are you saying that none of that ever happened in your drill program? That's apparently what the CP signs off at.
Can you talk a bit more about some of the pressures that you might see when you speak about your mates who might be worried that you'll call them out on some of their work, knowing that they're going to give it their all to do a good job?
One thing that I've noticed a lot recently is people are recycling the table 1 and table 2s from one announcement to another, and sometimes from one company to another. There might be the same consultant working for 2 companies, and someone gets an assay result in for some drill holes. So what do you got to do to make an announcement, especially if it's price sensitive? Well, let's say it's some visible gold or massive sulfides, right? The drill, let's say it's a core drill. The core has been drilled, it's put in a box. The geologist rocks up at 9 a.m. in the morning, and I've done this myself, rock up at 6 a.m. in the morning, and there's a metre of massive sulfide. And it's a big deal for the company. It's the only thing the company's done in 2 years was drill this hole, because it took that long to get the hole drilled for whatever reason. And all of a sudden, you take a photo and you send it on an SMS to your boss. Oh, we just hit massive. And that the ASX, I think, believes that the company can instantaneously almost, or within the space of a trading halt, which is 3 days, well, the company should go into a trading halt, and then you've got a 3-day period to get everything together. Now, if you've just drilled the stick of core, you don't know exactly how deep it is until you put that on the rack and you measure it, and then you've got, because it's a price sensitive bit of information and you've got 3 days of time pressure on you, there's a lot of pressure to get this turned around quickly in the field, and then that's got to go back to the office, and the exploration manager's he's trying to compile a story around it, trying to put together a cross section and a map, and and a table 1 and a table 2. Oh, how did you cut it? Have you even cut it yet? How did you log it? What's the assay methods we're going to use? Have you done the QA/QC samples according to things, or et cetera, et cetera? So if a competent person and a company, which is, let's say, a small company, a couple of people, isn't prepared for this eventuality, it is bedlam. It's chaos to put this together within the time frame that the ASX gives you, 3-day suspension. And it can happen without any warning. You don't even think you're going to hit something, and then bang, you've got a chunk of VG. And that's where you also get into, sometimes you hit VG and there's no announcement. And one of the questions would be why? Someone has had to decide if it's price sensitive or not, and that's the board. The board also sets the direction of like the communication strategy. Who's deciding what is defined as high grade and world beating and world class, right? I mean, to use one example, Whitecliff Minerals the other week drilled a hole at Danvers, and they said it was the best copper result in the last 50 years. And I, of course, commented on that because I was like, is it? Is it though? Like, it's good, but is it, right? So there's this interface between the guys on the coalface and the competent person. He needs to get the documentation properly done, and that often is incomplete at the time of press. And also the CP and the board. There are a lot of companies which would be, say, pumping out a drilling announcement every week or two, and they're clearly trying to get some traction in the market, to put it one way, or just pumping the shit out of it in another way, right? Depending on how
news flow.
Yeah, well, news flow, exactly. Keeping the ducks fed.
Continuous disclosure.
Exactly. But is it?
What influences bad disclosure?
I think that there's one part's laziness, right? It takes a lot of effort to put a really good, solid piece of work together. Like to finish a resource, for instance, your maiden resource on a gold project, that could be 2 or 3 years worth of work. Now, you need to release something before you know what is there, right? So the JORC code's got exploration targets, and that can be very wibbly wobbly, and I love looking at exploration targets. And so you sort of go, yeah, it's a judgment. And I'm not saying anyone's particularly wrong, but we've got to, it's worth asking a question. And these are public releases, by the way, right? If you're not willing to have someone question you in public, don't put it out in public. If you have to by law, make sure that you've dotted the I's and crossed the T's. And, it's up to the board to make that decision as well. Set a corporate strategy about how are we going to communicate with our shareholders? What are we trying to do here? Are we trying to get the share price up? I mean, that's how people make money in the junior end of the market, mostly, is just pumping and dumping, to put it one way, or trying to get the share price up to raise some money to reduce dilution. Let's go drilling. One thing that I think is funny is companies which are gold companies getting into nickel and then getting into rare earths and flavour of the month. Loving gallium at the moment. Love gallium, best metal in the planet. It's going to be used for defence industries if you ask one guy, aerospace if you ask the next guy. All you've got to do is and one thing I say is you can tell when gallium's hot who's serious is because they actually go and explore for it. But you can also tell who isn't, because all of a sudden everyone's a gallium explorer and all they've done is go into their database and sort by gallium. I mean, and then they go, oh, we've identified gallium in bauxite, for instance. Here's the hot tip. Gallium and aluminium have a set ratio, and it very, very rarely differs from that. So if you've got a lot of aluminium, you'll have a lot of gallium. Now, what does that mean in realistic terms, in terms of, are these guys mining, or are they just mining the market?
Mining the market? That's cute. Try mining with margins. JD, in our industry, you need more than just good intentions and a drill rig. You need power. Reliable, affordable, ready when you need it. If you're serious about mining, that's what you need.
Mate, I don't know about you, but for me, cross-boundary energy comes to mind. These guys are delivering solar. They're delivering wind. They are delivering battery solutions for mines all across the globe.
They built these hybrid power stations all over Africa, where power is notoriously unreliable, mate. And now they're kicking goals all over Australia, mines across the country.
Gets better though, mate. Here's the bit, and this is the thing that CFOs out there will love. You don't even need to pay for it up front. Build, own, operate, mate. They will take on the CapEx for you. All you have to worry about is plugging in that clean, reliable energy. CFO gets to keep his bonus, mate. Serious miners use cross-boundary energy. And the rest?
They're just mining the market.
Tim Taylor's the man, JD. I shook his hand last week and I got an electric shock. That's how much of a power guru Tim is. Head to crossboundary.com, get in touch with Tim Taylor if you're serious about power and serious about mining.
Go CBE.
I love long sections because it's kind of this interface between science and art. There is an art to making a decent long section. And, a long section can, if it's done properly, display the shoot direction in a mine, but there's so many different ways of doing it, and you see these long sections turn up, and it's just clearly, the guy's got his pencil and he's just artistically putting in a little wibble and a wobble, and anyone whose name's Justin doesn't like me because I keep picking on their long sections, but yeah, like I think, why would you justify there being a wiggle in there? What is there a fault? Is there a structure? Or is it just that you've got the max gold down hole, and then you want to make a nice solid contour around it, and then you just chuck an open arrow on it? The open arrow is always open at depth, right? So yeah, these are some of the tropes on the ASX that people. It's just the way that everyone's communicating in mining, and sometimes there's no real science behind it.
I'm keen to explore these tropes. But first, I want to address the I suppose like the defense of a company is that their cost of capital is their share price. So they have to promote because they need a low cost of capital for future future accretion to benefit all shareholders. So they've got to promote. But there's this grey line, right, between promotion and dishonest disclosure.
There's a few things that I think are black and white.
Yeah.
And a lot of these are covered in the JORC code as well, and some of the guidance notes. Some of the things that get misused, for instance, would be portable XRFs, right? Magic gun. The days before PXRFs were horrific because you'd have to wait for the assays, and back then, obviously, you could get results within a week or 2 weeks, so it wasn't a terrible wait like 2022 when it was 8 weeks for assays, right? So the PXRF guns are great for characterising rocks, but when you get a chunk of massive sulfide, your eye's going to be drawn to the shiniest bit and you're going to zap it, and it's going to come back, and it's going to be high grade. Now, this is where you start getting into that whole, like, what information is price sensitive? And it's like, well, we've got a sticker core and it's got a nice little yellow bit of chalcopyrite. If I zap that and I get 8%, that then is, you almost justify having to make an announcement about how it's 8%. So you zap it and you've got a massive sulfides, you get up to 8% copper, bam, out it goes. And, it's like they cut it. And there's one example recently where they had up to, I think it was 6.5% golden deeps. The JORC code comes falls apart here, because you can just put a disclaimer in there and you can describe the methods and everything like that, but they cut it and it was like 0.15 or something. So it can be extremely unrepresentative sampling. And then the company's got to have a bit of maturity, I think, in that grey line about saying, well, okay, we're not actually assaying this. This isn't an assay to report. It's like someone's just zapped a piece of rock and we know there's copper because we saw the copper, we zapped the copper. Let's just wait. Let's be mature and step back, let the process run its course. You know, I understand companies need to get the share price up, but this is a chicken and egg thing. Is like, are you getting the share price up by the result of work, or are you doing work to get the share price up? And there's two different things there. One is, for instance, directed specials, drilling holes down the dip of the mineralisation. It's called the directed special because back in the 80s, people would drill down the dipping mineralisation to generate, and the share price goes up and the performance rights vest.
The good old days.
Yeah, not so good old. It's the good modern days, right? So
Happens to be the title of our daily newsletter.
yeah. So, you know, people are still drilling director specials. Even like a couple of weeks ago, not to harp on Whitecliff Nickel, Whitecliff Metals these days, but yeah, they drilled a hole which was down dip. Now,
what's the quick way your average punter can sort of suss that out?
Well, this is where I did have a bit to say on the Whitecliff announcement, because and like a lot of these things are complicated, multi-element sort of problems. Is that, you know, they picked up a project and it came with old 1960s drilling and some younger drilling at 2011. So sometimes you can't find the records of the old drilling, and you know it's been drilled, but there's no records, or the records are very poor. They're poorly described. There's no methodology, right? That all should go in the table 1 and table 2. We couldn't find all of the data. We're not sure what the methods were, and you see that a lot. The drill hole should be on the map, right? They should be on a map, and they were on some maps from Whitecliff, but not all maps. They should, if you drill a hole on a section, and it's, in this case, 15 metres away from the nearest historical hole, if it's not on the section, you're clipping the view of your section to exclude it for a reason, right? So, and I'm like, hang on, they've got a hole which is drilling the opposite direction to all the other holes. Why is that? Are they testing for an alternative dip on it? Well, let's have a look at the other holes, and you can compile that data, and it takes a little bit of time, but you realise that the ore body, or the mineralisation, I should say, dips one way. They've drilled down it, and they should have reasonably, I would say, not drilled that way, because they would know it was down dip. So how did that happen? I'm not sure. I can only speculate, right? But that's what I'm sort of doing, is like going.
But the share price flew. It flew.
Well, yeah, because it's
if
the
the
best,
ambitions were to create short-term hype.
the best result in 50 years.
It worked, and there was a cap raise off the back of it, and rinse repeat.
That's just coincidence, isn't it? Yeah. So, but yeah, like the bigger question is, like, is this the behaviour of a company that's going to be mining, or is it a company that's mining the stock market? So, I'm not sure. It's early days. But yeah, I think, you know, punters need. I think your average taxi driver, for instance, or Uber driver these days, who's taken a punt, and gold's running hot. How do they know a good gold project from a bad gold project? Geologists like me can look at the whole information and say, in Western Australia, I even go diving into Wamex, right, into the government data repository online and pulling in the old holes, checking them for how deep where the gold is, old cross sections, old stock market releases. There can be a lot of work that you might need to do as due diligence, and I know that a lot of people don't do it. it's the mobile phone led stock market these days. Everyone can be trading on their phone, and a few minutes you might miss the pump and dump, or the someone comes out with massive sulfides, you buy and everything. So, but yeah, how you need to know what you're doing. You need to have that knowledge and training and 2 decades of time in the trenches and for sometimes some pretty dodgy places, right? That I've worked for, and some pretty dodgy people that I've worked for, who are still, so yeah, there's a bit of like grizzled old veteran knowledge here that I can use to sort of identify a few things, and it just sometimes you just sort of think that doesn't quite seem 100% legit, and then you start digging, and then you start going into the geology, and things start, yeah, and you get a bit of a feeling, and so sometimes it's taken me a week or two worth of work to come up with a few posts. I did one recently on a rare earth explorer, and big long form article, and that was a lot of digging and researching, and I know not everyone's got a lot of time to do it, and that's fair enough, but
the tan breeze,
tan breeze,
yeah,
and everything,
CRML, yeah,
that was a lot of digging.
You do enough digging, and at some point you're gonna need ground support, and the ground support guru, Derek Hurd of Sandvik Ground Support, recently shared this with us. Your most proud moment.
I mean, to go back to some of the early day things, working with clients and having some wins, some shared wins up in like Mount Isa and things like that. It felt like a partnership working with those team up there, when I went up there in 98 to 2002 sort of thing. It really felt like a partnership.
What were you actually doing there?
So I was managing a small branch up there. So we had the depot in town, and we were literally their vendor managed system. So we were delivering product just across the road on trucks. We were going underground doing the testing. You really felt part of, that whole ecosystem that Mount Isa Mines were running. It was really, really great. And, we delivered some big outcomes. And at that time, there was a number of improvements going through the industry, things like resin bolting and things like that. Being part of driving that through the industry at that time was really cool.
I hope to love something one day as much as Derek Hurd loves ground support. Back to Roland. So in the red flags list, we've got the director's special in there.
Yep.
We've got the lack of, historic drilling kind of mentioned or glossed over, kind of not disclosed or shown. Selective reporting or overly socialized intersections. What do you mean by this point, Roland?
So one recent example, and sometimes I just get a bee in my bonnet about things, and one of them, and for no particular reason, but was Coonenberry, and they were coming out with 200 plus meters at 1 gram, but most of that was a much smaller section of it at a very high grade, and then a lot of what I would think would be subgrade material, and then they just average it all out. When you report, and there is a section in the table 1, data aggregation methods, right? Is how have you decided what your intersection is? Are we just going to use everything within this particular geological unit and just take the lot, right? So, and that's valid for some types of ore bodies like iron ore. You might just go, well, we can't, or it might be a minimum mining width, right? We got to take it all, so we're going to average everything between the hanging wall and the footwall, and that's what we're going to report. And so it becomes 100 meters at 0.9 or something, even though most of it might be a couple of meters, and that might be completely valid. Some of the gold industry at the moment is running into giant mills being fed by lower and lower grade material. Tarmula, 6 million tonne per annum, less than 0.7 head grade, right? 0.65 I think it is, right? That'll be miles and miles of 0.4 grams and a couple of veins of 1 and 2s and 3s and 5s. Doesn't matter. It all averages out. We're going to make money. Who cares? You socialise it. But when you're in exploration and, NMORs are relatively small, I'm sure the guys at Coonenberry would disagree, but relatively small shear hosted granite mineralization, and it's got some VG in it, some visible gold. That's true. It's got some nice high grade intersections. That's true. But they're reporting 200 odd meters, right? So when you actually look at where the high grade is, it seems to be all down low. So the question I would have there is like, why do you need to have a 200 meter intersection? And the other part about Coonenberry was that they were drilling it from the east, the north, and the south, and the west. So I'm like, no one does that. I know, for instance, I was told that by someone that he got fired by Ed Eshues because he suggested drilling a hole the other way, and reputed this is a bit of law that I was told in the industry, and Ed Eshues apparently fired this guy for suggesting that he turned the drill around because that's a sign that you don't know what's going on, and and you failed.
Haven't some discoveries been made that way?
They have, yeah. But so one of the things, like I was like, okay, so they're drilling it from the deposit was drilled from the southeast to the northwest, almost everything, and then Coonenberry comes, and then there was a historical hole drilled from the southwest to the northeast, and that had a huge intersection at 3.5 grams in it, and everything else was low grade. And yeah, so that needs answering. That question needs answering. Why did that one hole drilled in a different way get a massive hit?
Is it fair? Like I remember with Azure, right? I think they had put one hole kind of down the guts, but at that point they were actually just testing depth extension. They didn't know the depth, how deep it was at that point in time.
And also in nickel, people can drill down the guts of the ore body or parallel with the ore body, parallel with the dip as a platform for electromagnetic surveys, right? So at Spotted Quoll, that was found. Spotted Quoll was a nickel deposit, komatiite in a channel. I'm not going to pillory myself on the geology here, but it went down. There was a granite sill, and then the idea was that it continued below, but it was very risky to test. And so they drilled parallel with the ore body, and they just kept drilling beyond that. And then they put their EM probe down, and it lit up a conductor underneath the granite sill. And then they turned around and drilled it the right way. So there are reasons you do it. Yeah. Getting met samples is one reason that you might drill down the guts of the thing, is go, well, I need 300 or 600 or 2 tons of samples. You know, I was involved in a vanadium development company, and we were drilling vertically down a vertical ore body just to get material for metallurgy. Right? So there are reasons to do it, but it should be apparent, or at least it should be stated by the company that that's what you're doing, rather than drilling down the guts of it. Right?
Mm-hmm. So you want to disclose true width when you're doing something that feels like it's
true width can be extremely difficult to estimate. Okay. To estimate early on, because things could be folded and you don't know they're folded. You know, they might wander in dip, and you might be drilling something that you think is dipping one way, and then it might fold and then dip the other way.
Gotcha.
And it's only until you drill enough holes and get a solid model together that you can do true width. So I very, very rarely would peg people for not having true width, because once you say true width, well, that's the truth. And the truth in geology, there's
never truth.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's infinite numbers of infinite colours of blue sky for geos, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of carve outs that I suppose in a way that carve outs or reasons why people may not include certain information in disclosures, and the competent person could be sitting there going, mate, I just can't say that. And they don't put it in there. So why did Coonenberry have to drill it from north to south, and then east to west and west to east? They've now apparently settled on one direction based on the last couple of holes they've drilled. But yeah, it's a valid question to ask, because if you've got to drill a deposit from 4 separate directions, you know, the ghost of Ed Eshues would be in my ear going, "You're fired. You don't know what's going on."
He's still alive. He's not dead yet.
No, he's not. but yeah, like so like that's a good question. Is like, Why are they drilling it from 4 ways? Why don't they know? There's historic core. Have they not gone back to the historic core? They were putting out core photos. Right? I love core photos. In fact, I think more companies should put out more core photos on the.
Why?
You can look at how someone's laid out their core tray and look at how they've done their meter marks. Is the core oriented? Is there an ori line on it? Are the core blocks okay? Does it look like the recovery's good? Each tray is 1.1 meters long, so you can measure it out in paint by measuring pixels. You can even go, that's the meter marks are a meter apart, right? So you can actually look at the quality of the work that's going in at the company, and sometimes it comes up a little short, and there's a few little quibbles that one might have, but like I've done so much core in my life, and the core photos that I put out I make sure that core's oriented properly and that the ori line's visible, the meter marks are visible, that all the information's on the core. And you can look at someone's core photo on the ASX and go, these guys are doing really good work, or maybe they're not, right? And so, yeah, that's, I guess, one of the problems with disclosure is that what you disclose can tell as much about you as it tells about the rocks. How companies describe what they're doing describes as much their own strategy and philosophy and approach and attention to detail, in how they describe the geology. And also, at the other end of the scale there might be Great Western Exploration was putting pretty much scientific papers out on the Ureter Basin in 2010, 2012, right? It's probably a little bit too much for the average punter. Great reading for me, gives me some great ideas, but it's like, why would you be writing this huge, basically, thesis on the rocks of an area? It's like, well, is it because you're trying to educate your investors, or is it an ego thing, or are you just a super rock nerd, just can't shut up about rocks, right? Just has to write down this new theory. But it's also, the risk there is that you've got, and I don't want to knock companies for having a new theory that you're trying to explore for, right? A model that you're exploring for, but you run the risk of drilling it and finding out the model's wrong. Like say if, yesterday, LGM came out and they were drilling some conductive and EM bodies out in the Thompson Origin, and they've got their theories and they drilled a hole. It was really encouraging results, I thought, but it does run the risk of, like, you've got an idea, you go out, you test it, the idea is wrong, and then you have to admit to the ASX and your investors, yeah, we got it wrong. And I think that a lot of companies are afraid that you can't ever be seen to be wrong, and that's where the old classic bury it in the quarterly happens. People go out, they drill a hole, and then there's just dead silence, and it turns up buried at the back end of the quarterly as a list of drill hole results. And that's another thing as well, is like, you have to list your collars, not only put them on a map, and it has to be an appropriate map and an appropriate scale. For instance, Trig Minerals recently, the antimony project in the US, they've got this map in there for sure, but like there's this tiny little bit in the middle that's their project, and even if you zoom in, you can't actually tell what the geology is, what's going on. And it's like, that's not a good map. Doesn't pass my JORCWTF test. I'm like, well, come on, guys. And then
You're big on maps.
Yeah, and
why are maps so important for disclosure here?
Well, we're exploring rocks, and your tenement is your asset, right? So you want to be able to demonstrate in a map, and it might be the most over-interpreted map ever. It may demonstrate your theories more than reality, right? But at least put a map out, and it's also the punters have paid, whoever bought the shares at the last cap raise, they paid you to drill holes. So why aren't you putting the holes on a map so they can tell where the holes were drilled? right? Why are they? One thing that's I've been sort of saying a little bit is like, if a company's not telling you the truth about what they're doing, they're lying to you. Why would you invest in a company where someone's lying to you about something, even if it's a lie of omission instead of commission, right? If someone drills 100 holes and they put 20 on a map and they maybe don't even release all of the holes, right? Sometimes you see lists of holes from 1 to 100 and there's 20 holes in the list. Where's the other 80 that were drilled, right? Did they get any results? Did they not get any results, right? There's no shame in, I would think, releasing 100 holes out of 100 holes that got no significant results, or subgrade or whatever, or only a few get a good result. I mean, that's what you were paid to do, is take a risk on the project. So yeah, put them on a map. Make sure the map's got your geology on it. So you can, if we're looking for nickel, you want to see an ultramafic rock on the map. Put it on the map. If it's not on the map, do you have ultramafic rocks? What have you got? What, it's not just because I'm curious about the geology. I'm like, well, what is the rock you're looking for? Is it on the map? Can you demonstrate the presence of it in any way, shape or form? And I know that sometimes it's all undercover, but there's a magnetic anomaly, interpret it, put it on the map.
A couple of the other red flags we've got to mention. Firstly, metallurgy, or sort of scant reporting on met.
Yeah. The mining industry and mining in general has generally depleted the easy to get stuff, right? So if you're looking at gold, Hemi, for instance, like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, anything that needed pressure oxidation was death. And now, after Hemi, everyone's like, oh, yeah, we'll go to Aphrodite. I think you guys are mentioning that. We'll go to Aphrodite. We'll just chuck it in a reactor. It'll sort out. Why aren't we doing it? Well, it's the arsenic trioxide, guys. It's death. If you've got death. But yeah, that's an illustration of where we're now doing more complicated ores, especially in rare earths, and HPA, for instance, is another. And I know I've done HPA, I've done complicated metallurgy, 2 patents, yay me. But if we are doing this work and we've got to put in more effort metallurgically, communicating that process it is not easy. And, there's 15 years on average between a discovery and a mine. So why aren't we comfortable with this, and I'm sure that the serious money is comfortable with that. They understand that and they're willing to fund it. The banks are willing to do it. But like the junior companies which are coming up with a gallium thing, like NIMI with their gallium, it's in a chlorite schist. What's the metallurgy? I don't know, right? So we've got to understand that metallurgy is an iterative process. It's science. It's buckets and beakers and crushing and floating and you do it once and then you go, oh, we'll tweak the knobs and do it again. But like, why do we expect it to be just done? Saturn. I've made a bunch of money out of Saturn recently, but it's in the boring Lassonde curve.
Gotta say ding 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 when you.
Yeah, and they're in the process. And I did a DFS in Western Australia on a heap leach, right? I know what's ahead of them, and it's a whole lot of columns, and it's a whole lot of agglomeration, and so much of it, more than you could imagine for something that big, and and they're doing a great job, but they're just at the start, and the market's not ready for. Oh, we did another 50 columns this quarter, and that's all we've done. But, the results are, we don't know. Right? That's part of the process. That's part of that 15 years. Is Saturn in year 13 or is it in year 10? We don't know. They don't know. So, yeah, reporting mineralogy and metallurgy, and also one of my bugbears, and I call them the magic pudding, right, is a deposit with a bunch of stuff in it, And carbonatites are great. Like Tanberries is an example of this. Zircon, rare earths, niobium, and also apparently feldspar and fedsonite, right? Which is three basic minerals: eudialyte, feldspar, and fedsonite. Now, European Lithium says that they can make money out of all three, and there will be no waste. And it's like, okay, that's a magic pudding. You can take a slice out and take another slice and another slice, and everything's valuable, right? But in
Real world doesn't work
reality,
that way.
yeah, in order to mine, you have to make waste. And we understand this in gold because everyone's like, oh, low strip ratio of 2-to-1 or 5-to-1, or what's high strip ratio? 11-to-1, 18-to-1 for some of them. And there's always, grade, tonnage and blah, blah, blah. But in order to produce a ton of ore, if you've got to produce 5 tons of waste rock, well, that's waste, right? If you get a ton of ore with 6% rare earths in it, let's say, like at Mount Weld, well, there's still 94% waste, stuff that you're not going to sell. So you have to produce the waste. So if you turn around and go, well, we've got 1% rare earths, and then we've got 0.5% niobium, and we've got 7% zirconium, and we've got some gallium, right? They were mentioning gallium. Well, we got gallium too. Well, of course you do, because you've sorted the columns, right? At some point, you've got to ask, well, how much does it cost to get each and everything out? Is it justified? Is it going to pay it off? Can it be done? At what point do you throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? Now, one example here, which is like really on point, is that Deflector used to be. I worked there. One of my first jobs was for this busted ass company called Batavia Mining, but that was an old gold copper mine, and it fell over because the cyanide circuit choked on unrecognised copper ore in the saprolite, the supergene copper digenite. It sucked all the cyanide out, and they went bust within a couple of weeks. Bang, done.
I didn't know the copper was there.
No,
Wow.
because it was in the. They knew there was oxide copper, and they threw that away, but they didn't realise that the digenite was there because it's this anonymous sort of black stuff.
Yeah.
Right, and they drilled. They got the gold. They threw that in the CIL plant, stripped it, preg robbing they call it. So it robbed all the, and they lost all the gold in circuit, and then they couldn't recover it in time. They went bust. Batavia was exploring, and they did. Batavia and did a PFS or scoping study, and it was something like this was in 2008-ish, right? $300 million, and I forget the name of the company that came after it, but it was a guy, John Grieve, and I remember talking with him, and he was like, "Well,
Dore?
No, it was before Dore.
Okay.
Something like Buccaneer or something.
Okay.
Yeah. And Dore bought them.
Gotcha.
Because what they did was they said, well, there's $300 million to get the oxide copper and gold, and then to go into the fresh sulfide copper and gold, which is chalcopyrite with gold via gravity. But that was split effectively into two components: 150 for the oxide and supergene plant, and 150 for the fresh rock underground. The oxide plant would have only made $150 million of cash flow. So it was NPV negative to recover the transitional oxide. So John Grieve said, we're just going to stockpile it, forget that malarkey. We'll stick down on the 150 mil for the fresh rock, and the NPV all of a sudden went up, and then they got bought by Dore, right? So this is an example of someone looking at it and going, sure, we could get everything out, but it's not actually worth getting everything out. We'll stick to what's going to actually make us money. And it's the same for these carbonatites and Tanberries, is like, what will make them the most money? And that's what they've got to do the metallurgy to get the solution for. If you've got a copper, zinc, lead, silver, gold, indium, rhenium, blah, blah, gallium, germanium deposit, right? You've done the assays, you've got all of it, and then people start talking about metallurgical work, and they go, oh, we've got a metal equivalent. and then they just sum it all up. And if you don't, and this is in the JORC code and it's also in the listing rules, if you don't account for the costs of recovery in your metal equivalency, you're effectively lying. For instance, germanium, right? It's worth $300,000 a tonne or something like that. So you go, oh, I've got 6 ppm. That's $60 right there. Bang, done. Problem is that the payability is near zero. And also not every smelter will take it out. So in fact, you've got to send it to China, basically. So yeah, so there's these sort of things get sort of peddled on the ASX as, oh, we've got all of these metals because we assayed for them. And here's a metal equivalent and it's like 7 grams of gold equivalent. And it's like, when you look in the list, it's like 0.1 grams of gold and all the other stuff, but they're calling it gold equivalent because gold's what people want to invest in. And you think, well, that's kind of most of the values in the copper, right? So that's another thing that you sort of pick on is people going, oh, I've got a copper project. It's like, well, it's mostly gold. Or I've got a gold project. Oh, it's mostly zinc. You know, so yeah, there's a whole bunch of things. And that's mostly the choice of how the company wants to get investors engaged with it. It might turn into a mine. Who knows?
That's the magic pudding, eh?
Yeah.
And the final one you had, Roland, was geotech work. What you can infer about the company's willingness to mine.
Yeah. Like one recently that I got a bit of a bugbear about was London Metals, and you know they've done great. They're lucky because they've got 18,000 ounces in a pit right at surface, and it's right next to St Ives and everything like that. But before they did their resource, they put out a map and some drilling data, and they've got geotech holes. Now, it sort of struck me as odd because normally the process is that you do your exploration drilling and you get that all together and you go, okay, I think we've got a resource. So we're going to go and model the resource, and we're going to create a block model of some kind, even if it's just an informal one for internal use only or whatever they say to themselves, to avoid having to say, well, we've done a resource and, you know, maybe they haven't done the QA/QC properly and they're just, you know, so they can't release it because it's not right proper. But you get an idea, right? You do your back of the envelope and then you do a whittle optimization, which then basically says, well, if with all the inputs you've got from mining costs and the value and the metallurgy, which you haven't released yet, but you must obviously have an assumption on, and you put it all in the pot and you cook it up, and it basically whips out this pit shell, and it's very rough and it's not, you know, got no geotechnical input into it, but that gives you an idea of mathematically what's the pit going to look like, how big's it going to be, roughly where are the walls going to be. And so one of the things you've got to do, especially if you're getting mining finance from a bank, is geotech, to make sure the pit doesn't fall in on your head. And it's also part of the Safety and the Mines Act as well. You know, you've got to consider that, is that you got to make a design that is fit and will not kill people. So you have to do geotech. So it's a pretty good indicator that someone's serious about mining when they're chucking geotech in, right? And it also means that they must have a pit wall that they're aiming the geotech towards, which means that they've got a whittle optimization, which means they've got a block model of some kind, which means that they've done a resource and they know what they've got, right? So when a company just randomly releases geotech holes, you sort of work your way back and you go, oh, you've got to go resource, optimization, pit, geotech. The other way to look at it is, oh, we've got a resource, we've got a pit optimized, we're going to be the next great gold producer, we're going to make 150,000 ounces a year starting next year, and there's no geotech, right? So either they're taking a massive risk on that, or they're not actually prepared to go mining because they haven't done the geotech for the pit design processes, right? So it's a tell. Anyone who's serious about mining will be doing geotech.
You've provided us with a list of your yellow flags as well. And the course of our combo, I think we've covered a few of them: selective sampling,
Yep.
and rock chip sampling in general, portable XRF, talked
Metal
about metal
equivalents.
equivalents,
Yep.
so talked about carbonatite. So that leaves visual estimates, exploration targets, scoping studies, and slick letterheads. Tell us about
Yeah.
these.
I
Slick
think the
letterheads.
easiest one's the slick letterheads. Is, you know, like we've discussed a lot about the sort of PR philosophies and strategies and stuff, and it's like a bottle of wine. The worst wine has the most outrageously good label, right? You know, you've got a $5 bottle of wine with this fantastic label, and then you've got Penfolds Grange with this like late 1800s style label on it, and you just know that Penfolds is the deal because they don't have to dress it up. Now, that's not to say that you should invest in guys who can't do typesetting, and have no promo. And promo is important in getting your message out there, because you could have 1 million ounces of gold and no one rates it if they don't know about it. But yeah, it's like, yeah, sometimes the harder they try, the more you sort of think, try hard. In terms of the visual estimates, I think we've kind of did that a bit. But one thing I will say is that the CPs are also having to do, and boards as well, and board members and company secretaries have to deal with the ASX, and the ASX isn't populated by people who know anything about rocks. And, you know, they have a shit list. And they even put out a guidance note last week saying that they're going to formalise that into, you know, companies which have had bad disclosure, or have not met expectations, or whatever they said, are going to get enhanced surveillance, which means they're on the shit list. And I've been talking with people who are on that list. I've worked for companies which are on that list, and you have to sometimes keep reissuing stuff for inane things. You know, I looked at it and I go, that looks fine, and I just move on to the next one, and then the next day they've had to retract it. And I don't always see everything either, right? A lot of people do send me little anonymous tips and say, "Oh, have you checked this out yet?" But the ASX, they're mostly lawyers, sometimes accountants, you know, and they're interested in complying with the listing rules, but they may not understand how difficult it is to get a proper visual estimate of the mineralogy in something. And classic was in the case of some of these lithium explorers would note tourmaline. Tourmaline's an indicator sometimes that it's not lithium bearing. Some tourmalines are an indicator it is. It depends on the tourmaline species. If you're on the side of a hill in the Pilbara and you don't have access to a TEMA or a spectral scanner, you just say it's tourmaline bearing pegmatites. You announce it, it comes out with some assays, and they go, "Oh, you didn't give us a percentage of the tourmaline." And it's like, it doesn't matter. It's just got to have tourmaline in it to be prospective, right? And yet they want to know exactly what minerals in all of your minerals in percentage terms. So, you know, some people I've worked with have had to go and reissue ASX announcements and just sort of go, geez, I don't know, what was it? 70% feldspar, 2% tourmaline. Go back to their photos and have to give a modal abundance, the abundance of each mineral visually in the rock sample that they took weeks ago in the Pilbara, and they've got the assays for, right? And it's just inane and frustrating, and it's getting worse, and it's going to get a lot worse, I think. So yeah, people have to be very cautious about saying, "Oh, we hit something or other," and also visual abundances have to come out with disclaimers about, we can't tell that there's penalty elements, and that includes for visible gold. A lot of the people with a photo, like say New Murchison, right, massive slug of gold. Oh, visual estimate. Okay, yeah, it's a giant chunk of gold. We all know that that's worth something, but we can't tell you exactly how much gold's in it till we assay it. Okay, We also can't tell you if there's any deleterious elements in it until we assay it. And I'm like, well, it's metal, whatever. But that's just what you've got to go through. So there's this whole layer of bureaucracy with the ASX where they're not really bringing anything to the team, right? They don't sometimes understand the difference between ounces contained in a resource and tons in a resource. You know, some of these people are getting confused about units of measurements, what inferred resource is versus an indicated resource. You know, they'll get confused about that. How can you claim it's inferred when you haven't done the work? Well, but we've got measured in there as well. We've done the work to get to measured, so we have to have some inferred in there. That was one of the things. It's like they were saying you can't have inferred in your resource. It's like, well, and also in terms of, say, scoping studies and forward-looking statements, there's a minefield, and I don't envy a lot of people with this.
ASX has been big on this lately, right?
Yeah, and there are a few which have been, really taking the piss. But especially for scoping studies, sometimes it's kind of like, you know, a thumb suck, and it has to be plausible, but not probable, right? So is it possible that sometime in the next 10 years we can get this out of the ground and make some money out of it? Yes, okay. And then you have to explain the methods you went through. It may have a resource, it may not have a resource. There's nothing saying you can't do a scoping study on an exploration target. Some people have done that. Other people have had to go all the way through to indicated resources level of quality before they can do a scoping study. Certainly the majority can't be from inferred resources. You can't put out a forward-looking statement because you haven't got the certainty on inferred resources to do that.
But
so
companies, if they can slip it through, they do, and then they issue the retraction at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, but the numbers are out there and the punches
that's, you know, there's been some complaints made about that sort of behaviour as becoming the norm, and that's sadly entirely on the ASX for letting it through in the first place. Right. Now, everyone will try it. You'll try anything once. So let's give it a go. Let's see if we can slip it through. Sometimes it's unintentional for sure. Other times it is intentionally trying to get it out there so they can retract it. You know, but at the end of the day, you can't publish on the ASX without, at least in theory, someone reviewing it. So, yeah, the ASX needs more people. They need better, need better people on the job. That's another layer of complexity there for CPs and boards to have to deal with as Australia goes overseas to, say, Africa, Eurasia, Southeast Asia. A lot of these places, there's no legal requirement to report drilling, so it never gets reported or comes with...
Is this common that a lot of drilling can be done sometimes and just never, like the results of it never reported?
Yep.
Is that allowed?
In Australia, no,
Right.
it's not allowed.
Yeah. Does it still happen in Australia?
Oh, yeah. Especially if you've got prospecting licenses.
Right.
It's getting less common.
Roland, you're an industry outsider. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, more or less. I'm underemployed by the industry at the moment, and people have said you'll never get a job with those guys if you say that.
You've pissed off a lot of people in the last 12 months in particular, right?
I've had a couple of people contact me, and I've got the impression that they might be unhappy, but I've actually got a little bit of work reviewing people's stuff, or it's given me an introduction to people who sort of realise that maybe they haven't done haven't, disclosed things properly, and they needed to go back and check their work. And in a way, maybe it's costing me some jobs, but, would I last very long with those companies is the other question. People don't like to be questioned.
most people don't like to do things that they know will cause other people to dislike them. So what motivates you to continue JORCWTF?
Well, I've always been someone who likes to poke at things, and I'm not expecting to see a lot of company directors respond to me. There's been a couple, but I think that the majority of people who reach out to me are either investors or young geos. The investors are like, I learned so much from what you're doing. I learned a lot about the processes of mining and everything, and I've learned to read announcements better. And young geos who are saying, oh, I've never really considered that I need to do this, that, and the other thing in order to be JORC compliant. And the other thing is, like, people use JORC as this sort of magic term. It's JORC compliant, and therefore they use it to sort of legitimise all sorts of stuff. JORC's just a code of telling people what you've done. So it's like saying, I'm compliant with telling you what I've got to do, but yet I don't do that. I just say I'm JORC compliant. I don't actually tell you what went into the sausage or the lasagna, right? And there's layers and layers of meat and pasta, and we're just going to give you the cheese on top. And it's like, okay, me, is sitting there saying, hang on, I've peeled the cheese off on top and there's no meat. It's like, yeah, if you feel offended by that, I would think, well, maybe you should hire me. Maybe give me a job to review your disclosure before it goes out. I'll do that. I'd love to be paid for this. But yeah, would someone hire me as a senior exploration geo because I've poo-pooed what they did on some project 5 years ago? Would they turn me down? Maybe. I mean, but that's fine. I'll do my own thing.
Thanks for making the time and coming on the show.
Yeah, no worries. I'll be sitting there and on LinkedIn doing what I can when I'm not in the field.
Fighting the fight.
Peer review is one thing that's coming, is proposed for competent people and disclosures. And, it's an interesting idea, but yeah, like who else is out there asking these questions,
I think that's super well said.
JORCWTF.
Yep.
Thanks
Fantastic.
so much, Roland.
Cheers.
Awesome, mate. A wealth of knowledge for the punters out there. I'm sure they all like that one as much as I did. We've got a few partners to thank to wrap this one up. Big thank you to Mineral Mining Services, Grounded, Sandvik Ground Support, K-Drill, Cross Boundary Energy, and check out the Focus platform by MarketTech.
You can find the show on there. Hoodaroo, Money Miners.
Now remember, I'm an idiot, JD's an idiot. If you thought any of this was anything other than entertainment, you're an idiot and you need to read out a disclaimer.